Hi, everybody. Mr. Johnson here, and today we are talking about a brand new artist in the Artist Gallery. So if you are my student, make sure that you have your sketchbook, your artist images, scissors, glue stick, and something to write with so we can be cutting and pasting those pictures. So today we're going to talk about the awesome current artist, Titus Kaphar. Titus Kaphar is an incredible contemporary artist who's an African-American painter who creates these images that are based in historical context with a twist that relates them to contemporary events or reveals kind of a neglected African-American characters from history, especially from American history. So make sure that we are cutting out the Titus Kaphar images from our artist gallery collection, and we'll be pasting those into our sketchbook while I give you some background information on Titus Kaphar. He was born in 1976 in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and he currently lives and works in New Haven, Connecticut. Titus Kaphar received his Master's of Fine Arts from the Yale School of Art and is a distinguished recipient of numerous prizes and awards, including the 2018 MacArthur Fellowship Grant, which is considered the Genius Grant. It's an incredibly high honor for anyone to win. So for this artist, that's absolutely incredible. His artwork was featured on the June 15th 2020 issue of Time magazine. It was on the cover. He gave a TED Talk in Vancouver where he completed paintings in this style live on the stage. His work has been included in solo exhibitions in the Seattle Art Museum, Studio Museum in Harlem, the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, and the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C., among others. Titus Kaphar is an artist whose paintings, sculptures, and installations examine the history of representation by transforming those styles and mediums with informal innovations to emphasize the physicality and dimensionality of the canvas and the materials that he's using. His practice seeks to dislodge history from its status as the past by combining it with current events happening right now. What I love about his artwork is that he cuts, crumbles, shreds his canvas. He breaks it up, rips it up, right? So these are not all just nice flat paintings. These are three-dimensional sculptural paintings, which I think is really cool. And the way he rips open and tears the canvas directly relates to the subject matter that he is painting. So let's take a look at some of his individual artworks, and we're going to hear a little bit from Titus Kaphar himself. So I'm going to move myself out of the way and play this for you.
I make paintings that people perceive often as being very social or political, but for the most part, they're all very personal. Everything stems from my relationship to a situation, to a narrative, to a story. My name is Titus Kaphar, and I'm an artist. I had one art history book that had a particular chapter in it that actually did focus on Black people, people of color. These characters are often enslaved, in servitude, or impoverished. And so it drew me to wanting to understand how this all came about, representing Black people. What was their symbolic purpose in the paintings and in the sculptures that they were in? Because clearly it wasn't for them to be the primary character. I use a lot of different techniques in making paintings. Sometimes the surface of the canvas will be cut out, something will be removed from the surface of the canvas in order to show something behind. This theme or this idea of layers and multiplicity is awesome. A reoccurring theme in my work. There are always multiple narratives. I'm asking the viewer to try to piece that whole story together without leaving behind the valuable narrative of, in many cases, those people who have been silenced over years. The Jerome Project is an investigation into the criminal justice system. I started this project because my father's name is Jerome, and my father has spent time in and out of prison and jail throughout my life. I Googled my father and found his mugshot, which of course didn't surprise me, but I found 97 other men with exactly the same first and last name and all of their mugshots. And I began to paint those mugshots as these small devotional size, religious style paintings with gilded backgrounds. I then submerged those paintings into tanks of tar based on the amount of time that these folks had spent incarcerated. Currently, I'm working on a body of work called Monumental Inversions. And Monumental Inversions is a group of sculptures that kind of speak to this conversation that we're having in our national narrative about what to do with our national sculptures. So I began to make a body of work that I felt like could potentially amend some of the absences and challenges of our current sculpture. I think merging art and history can help to motivate social change. The Next Haven Project attempts to bring communities together. We have a fellowship program that invites artists who are coming out of the graduate programs to come and make a life for themselves in New Haven for the year that they are here, to engage the community. They get professional artist development. It wasn't until I was in my mid-20s that I found art. I feel really strongly that if I can do anything to help other young folks who come from the kind of communities that I come from discover their passion, discover the thing that motivates them, I will be a happy man.
That's awesome. I love hearing by the artist in their own words about their own work and their own process. It's one of the best things about learning about current and contemporary artists is that we have those resources where they can talk about what they make and why they make it. And I love his story and what he's doing with art. It's so different. Nobody else is doing work like Titus Kaphar. You can recognize his work immediately. I think it's so cool. So this is the first painting that you should include in your sketchbook for Titus Kaphar. It's called Another Fight for Remembrance, painted in 2014. This is an oil painting that uses gold leaf, and we'll point that out in a second. This painting, again, made in 2014 and unfortunately still very relevant today, is about protests happening. And the idea of this, right, so there's a young black man in the center with his hands up, and all the white marks are meant to be lights, right? So this is at night, right, that dark black background. But the white marks that are all on here are street lights, people's cell phone cameras, right, their phone lights on. He's commenting on, obviously on police aggression against African Americans in our country, but also about, I think, the people watching this, right? All these lights around it, all these marks background are meant to be a crowd of people that are all watching and recording, what's happening. And I think that has a very strong message, and I think it comes across brilliantly. So I love that he mixes this super realistic painting, right? The face of this figure is incredibly realistic, and then these marks with the white paint with those big brush strokes give it so much energy and movement and excitement. And it's about, a very unfortunate, terrible subject matter, but the way he paints it, I think, is just gorgeous. The gold leaf is included in this, halo that's around the young man's head. Titus Kaphar says that paintings like this, he's done a series about these, are based on, real events. He said he has had issues with police aggression. The police approached Titus Kaphar and his brother in Chelsea, New York, accused of stealing artwork from art galleries when the art that he was looking at is his art. And so he said policemen had their hands on their guns, accusing him of stealing the art that was in fact his own art. And so he said, this has obviously huge meaning for him. But I think it's an absolutely beautiful and genius way to portray these events. So let's talk about the next artwork you should include. This is called Shadows of Liberty, painted in 2016, that uses oil paint and rusted nails. It also uses strips of canvas. So this is obviously a portrait of George Washington riding his horse right? The first American president of the United States, George Washington. And it's this beautiful landscape, right, with these rolling clouds with oranges and purples and bright yellows in there. With this blue sky peeking through, and then it's on top of this rocky landscape, and the white horse is just beautiful, incredibly rendered. And then there's this mass that is covering George Washington. And again, this is what I love about Titus Kaphar, how he combines this realistic painting with these really new conceptual ideas of breaking up the canvas space. So the texture on top of George Washington is a recreation of a page from a ledger that listed all of George Washington's slaves that he owned, during the American Revolution and during his time as president. And each of those names appears on strips of canvas that are like spilling from George Washington's mouth and wrapping him up. And he used nails to attach each of these strips to give it this visceral, three-dimensional, rough and tragic textural element, which I think is beautifully rendered, but speaks a lot about how history is whitewashed, how we think of, we revere George Washington, but he did own a lot of slaves, and that's a part of history that is often overlooked. But so that's the concept of the painting, but I think it's absolutely beautiful, and I love those three-dimensional textural elements that he adds. Here's one that you don't need to include, but I just think it's beautiful. It's called Falling from the Gaze. This was also painted in 2014. And this shows something that Titus Kaphar does often, which is mix different layers of canvas. So the top layer is actually peeling off and hanging forward. It's a three-dimensional element. So it is this, white woman that is painted on the bottom, and she's revealing the face of this black man behind her. And again, similar to the painting of George Washington, it talks about how these African-American figures from our history are hidden, covered up, right, by the white figures that are the ones that are really in the history books, even though there's so many other people that were behind them that don't get recognized. So the way that he depicts this with the painting literally peeling back to reveal the black man behind it, I think is just gorgeous. Plus the way he painted the faces are incredible. And then here's one for you to include in your sketchbook, maybe my favorite one by Titus Kaphar, but that's a difficult choice to make, so I don't know, but I love them all. This is called Behind the Myth of Benevolence, also painted in 2014. This is a 3D painting. So there are two paintings in one here. There is the painting on the canvas in the back, and then this other painting that's on a loose piece of canvas that is hung over it, that is falling off like a curtain, right? And that curtain is pulled over and reveals his figure in the back. So if you recognize this figure, this is a painting of Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hennings, who's a slave that he owned, that he had a relationship with. And again, the concept here is black figures in history that have been literally covered up by our nation's founders, right, by the white figures from history. Now, the portrait of Sally Hennings is not historically accurate, and Titus Kaphar says he does that on purpose, that although it is meant to represent her, it's not a strict portrait of her because it is meant to represent kind of all of the black figures in history that were covered up by the founders of the country. And I think it's such an interesting piece to interact with because it is literally covered by a whole nother painting that you can open up and move and close. So it adds this interactive element, which I think is incredible. And again, his technical ability as a painter is flawless. The way he paints figures and the light on their faces is absolutely beautiful. But it's this three-dimensional interactive element that adds so much meaning to his paintings. And I think that the storytelling that he does here is absolutely incredible. Here's one other one that you don't have to include that I think is just a really cool optical illusion called Seeing Through Time, painted in 2018, where you have the silhouette of this main figure, and inside that silhouette is a close-up portrait right, of this black figure. And I think that is such a beautiful way to create a painting, right? Drawing out the silhouette, but instead of depicting the figure there, you're showing the portrait of someone else looking back at ancestors. I think that's absolutely incredible. I love his paintings. He is very active online, so if you enjoyed his artwork, you can Google him, look up Titus Kaphar, look at some of the other work he's created. He has all these series of beautiful, beautiful paintings, so don't hesitate to check him out. Now, we're going to take a photo of our artist gallery page like we always do and add it to the artist gallery assignment on Google Classroom. So go under classwork, scroll down to find the artist gallery assignment and add your Titus Kaphar page. And then in the text box, answer this question: how can art help us learn about society? Right? Titus Kaphar, his artwork isn't just beautiful and interesting to look at. It has a message and a meaning. So do you think art can help us learn about society? How can it, what is art's role in learning about society? So hopefully you enjoyed Titus Kaphar. We'll see you next week with another artist gallery.